Right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the Adults and Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. The meeting is being broadcast live via YouTube, and it will also be available for viewing after the meeting. I have apologies from Mrs. Wright, and I would like to welcome Mr. Lovegrove to the meeting, who is present as a substitute. Can I ask all members that when they speak to put the microphone on and to turn it off when they finished? And nothing more agenda, we go to agenda item 1, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of January 2024. I propose that the minutes of the meeting are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is everybody in agreement? Thank you. Agenda item 2, question time. I've received no questions from members of the public. Agenda item 3, questions asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. I've received no questions from members. Agenda item 4, to advise of any other items which the chairman has decided to take as urgent. There are no urgent items today. Agenda item 5, declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Does any member have any interest that they wish to declare? No, thank you all. Agenda item 6, there are no declarations of the party whip in accordance with procedure rule 16. And under agenda item 7, there are no petitions being presented under Standing Order 35. We have 4 substantive reports today. The first one is agenda item 8, which is pages 13 to 62, and is the CQC assessment of local authorities, and is with John Wilson, who's supported by Debbie Moore, the Improvement Manager, Strategy and Planning. And I think, are you introducing and then Debbie taking over, John? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this is the first report that we brought on CQC assessment in the period when CQC have now gone live with assessment. So the previous reports that we brought were while CQC were piloting their approach or developing their approach. They ended that pilot phase at the end of last year, and they are now actively assessing local authorities under the assessment process that they've developed. So at the end of last year, they completed the 5 pilots that they had set out to do. They developed an evaluation of those and made some tweaks to their process, but largely the process is as it was. So they will continue to assess local authorities across those areas that we were previously aware of, working with people, providing support, ensuring safety, leadership, and they will, at the end of that process, provide ratings for each authority from inadequate through requires improvement, good and outstanding. So we brought a report today to just highlight some of the areas that CQC will be focusing on. It's much clearer now in terms of their process, but also to update committee in terms of our own self-assessment and the areas that we had on our own improvement plan. So I'll just ask Debbie if she'll go through the detail of the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. So yes, the CQC published their pilot assessment reports at the end of November 2023. Key findings from those reports were that the CQC found outcomes were generally better for people where there were good partnership working arrangements, both with health and community and voluntary organisations. Where integrated hospital discharges services were in place, that support led to better outcomes for people and a better flow of patients out of hospital. The CQC found that there are waiting lists for assessments, but the local authorities were managing the risks associated with those waits. The CQC also found that where that staff retention was better, where staff felt valued, and where there was a positive culture, and where there were opportunities for learning and development. They also noted that there was different practice when working with young people as they were transitioning from children's into adult services, and therefore people's experiences were slightly varied. And also they noted that capacity in the social care workforce was being addressed through incentives and different innovative approaches. across those 5 pilot assessments. So considerations for us as a council, as we sort of move through this next sort of stage of the CQC assessment process, is really around our self-awareness, making sure that we are clear about what we do well and those areas of concern and plans to address them. So in terms of that, I think there may be some scope within our self-assessment to be a bit stronger about what we do well, and we may consider in this very short term spending a bit of time sort of going back to staff, seeking their views and so on, and do more of a significant review of the self-assessment as it stands at the moment. Another area for us to consider is staff communication. So we're currently developing a fairly comprehensive staff communications plan. It's really sort of, I suppose, considering how we sort of changed the culture in the department a little bit so that staff are able to actually give a genuine, positive and realistic view of working for the county council, and to try and minimise the disconnect between what leaders say and what frontline staff are saying when they speak to the CQC. We also need to look at how we evidence the support we offer and the outcomes to different communities who are likely to experience inequality of their experience and outcomes, so that we can really sort of, it's about embedding all of that good sort of policies, awareness raising and training and so on, embed it into practice so that you actually see those outcomes delivered for different groups of people, that they all have a good experience and good outcomes. So we've got a big piece of work, really it's just starting around addressing that. We also need to look at our data collection and showing how we use data to support our service delivery and strategic planning. So I think some of our staff not necessarily very comfortable with data, and our lead practitioners have just started using this new really simple template to set out some fairly basic but key metrics that teams will be interested in, and they're using that as part of their practice development cycles, and that's something we can potentially build upon in the future to really get us used to talking about our data and actually having that full awareness of what it can show us and how it tells us about, informs us about our performance. It also highlighted working with colleagues in district and borough council housing services. The CQC reports did note that those joined up approaches that were evident in unitary authorities did lead to better outcomes. So that is something that we need to consider adding to our improvement plan. So we're really clear about what we can do and what we need to deliver around that area. And then also using that 3 conversations work to evidence our strengths-based approaches, undergoing that evaluation of the sort of locality-wide rollout currently, and there'll be some recommendations to roll out further in the coming months, and that will be something that we can say more about in the self-assessment when it's next reviewed. So I just wanted to touch on the CQC's assessment process. It is in the report at some length, but the CQC seems to be chunking the assessment down into 2 sections. So the first bit is within that first 3 weeks of us providing documentary evidence that supports our position. And then there's a bit of flexibility between when that evidence is provided and when they then come on site. I think originally they were expecting to come on site sort of about 8 weeks after, no, it was 9 weeks after that initial notification, but it seems that that's a bit more flexible now, and could be a maximum of up to 6 months after that first notification. And the site visits will really focus on meeting with staff, with partner organisations, with leaders, to hold interviews and seek their views on our our performance, and also there's a likelihood that we'll need to provide additional documentary evidence and data that helps illustrate what people are saying through those meetings. So in terms of the update to our self-assessment, which is Appendix A, we've made some changes to the layout since the original version you saw this time last year. So we're now using this 3-column table style layout. Since the CQC published their information return, and it's clear what they're actually asking for in that, I've been able to remove a few sections where the narrative that's in the self-assessment adds very little to the evidence that is included in the information return itself, such as the Better Care Fund reports and the compliments and complaints reports that we have every year. We've also looked at combining some of the topic areas, such as around strengths-based practice and provider quality and contract management. I've also tried to refocus the ensuring safety theme, so it's a little bit more on what we are doing as an authority in relation to safeguarding, and also added a bit of narrative around the hospital discharge process and how effectively that works under the Home First service. And then in the leadership theme, we've also tried to change the focus there more from the corporate element of the County Council's governance more to departmental governance, and also added some additional narrative around the equalities and diversity agenda. So the next review of the self-assessment's due to start in April, and we'll be looking at strengthening what we say around the transitions service, and also there's due to be a new LGA template that's published for the self-assessment, so we may consider adopting that layout in future as well, but we'll see what it looks like first. In terms of the improvement plan, the achievements that we have made to date are around information, advice and guidance. So we've had a new social care service landing page, which has been in place for a few months now. And we've also added a new financial assessment information video. And 44 of the web pages have been reviewed to make sure that they are up to date. The finance pathway has now gone live with its e-billing system, and they have been working, have done considerable work on reducing the assessment backlog. We've also involved the engagement panel in co-production of a number of things, such as our direct payment fact sheets, carers information. So over the next few months, I think one of our biggest priorities is going to be around communication with staff, focusing on supporting readiness for the CQC assessment. As I mentioned previously, we are developing a comprehensive communications plan, and this will aim to help staff and managers to support sort of positive messages around the CQC and ensure that staff feel ready and confident to talk to the CQC assessors when they're on site. And then the other significant piece of work we'll be doing is really around the equalities, diversity and inclusion, and making sure that we can evidence the effectiveness of that support that we offer to our communities and that people achieve good outcomes. That was all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Do you have any questions? Bill.
And yes, it's a bit disappointing that they don't seem to be looking after people on the waiting list by keeping them informed how things are going. So are we going to concentrate on that, keep people informed how they're on in the system of things on a more regular basis?
Yes, we
how
have.
How are we going to do it?
Pardon?
How are we going to do it?
We have our planned wait guidance, and that requires managers within the department to keep in touch with people while they're waiting to find out if there's any change in their needs, etc. And then they can reprioritise that person's position on the waiting list. There's also a regional impact project underway, which is also looking at other ways that we may be able to manage the risks around waiting and ensure that people have the best experience while they're waiting as possible. I think, John, you're involved in that, aren't you? Is there anything you would like to add?
Yes, thanks, Debbie. So as Debbie said, we have a waiting list practice guidance and policy, which all managers should be reviewing people who are waiting for assessment on a weekly basis, keeping in contact with people, making sure that we've got the right priority, and making sure that risks are managed. We've had that in place now around about 6 to 9 months, and over that period we've seen the waiting list drop by half. So we are managing to see people more quickly than we were, and we're managing to manage any risks attached to that in a cohesive way. The work with Impact is an organisation that's sponsored and hosted by the University of Birmingham. It's a national research into practice organisation for social care. And across East Midlands, we are working with the Impact team to look at people's experience of waiting. Because often what happens is that organisations like local authorities or others will look at the process. But this is a particular piece of research to look at actually how does it feel for people who are waiting? How does it feel for carers? How does it feel for families? What can we do to improve the experience? On the basis that many authorities across the country, the majority, I would suggest, have people waiting for care, have people waiting for assessment, have people waiting for care once assessment has been completed. We're not in that position. We don't have people waiting for care, but we do have people waiting for assessment. So this is to look at the experience that people have and to learn lessons about what would make that experience better for people. So it's a kind of a co-produced piece, working with people with lived experience, working with families and carers, to identify ways that we can manage that experience better for people. Barry.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've probably asked this question before in the past, but we've moved on a bit now. We've had these pilot scheme, which has obviously given you a good idea of what the CQC are looking at, and learning from that, we've got this rollout coming through. But where we have an inadequate, requires improvement, good or outstanding, where do you think we are?
So I get this question quite a lot. Yes, no, absolutely. I think my position probably hasn't changed, but it probably has been reinforced to a degree. So what I've said previously and consistently, I think, is that we would be on the cusp of requires improvement stroke good. And the reason I say that is because from a practice perspective, from a social care practice perspective, from a strategic and a policy perspective, I have absolutely no doubt that we would be good, and a strong good. The problem we've got is that our feedback that we have through the annual service user survey and the biannual carers survey puts a lot of our indicators in the bottom 2 quartiles. So when we ask people about satisfaction with services, when we ask them about how easy it is to access information, when we ask them about how much social contact they have, we don't do very well in comparison to others. And that, I think, is a problem for us. And I fail to see how CQC could assess any local authority as being excellent if they don't have very good feedback from people who use services. So I think there's a balance to be struck between the work that we do, the results that we get, the outcomes that people have, balanced against the feedback that people give us. And I think, what we do know about the pilots is that CQC, quite rightly, probably place a lot of weight on what people tell them and what feedback they get from people who use services, which is probably right. So we'd have to balance that off against some of the things that are in the self-assessment, and Debbie said, we have got some very good, strong points within self-assessment. But that's, I think, where we are.
So obviously, so you see where our weaknesses lie, and are you now concentrating on those areas to improve on that? Is that what we're saying? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think it's a good detailed report to us as a committee to find out where we are and where we think we are. A little bit concerning. John thinks what we might be adequate and to good, because we always want to be good or excellent, or required, never that. But yeah, it's that feedback bit. I've got it highlighted here, the customer feedback, because obviously from a service industry perspective, if you're rubbish, your customers tell you you're rubbish. So if that's the feedback we're getting back, what's the action plan to address that going forward? So when they do visit us, because there's nothing to say that they're going to come next week or the week after. It might be several years down the line, so we've got time. What's the action plan to reshape that and reshape the thinking of our customers?
So a number of areas. The main two, which I think feed into the feedback that we get, are the experience that people have when they contact the customer service centre, and the experience people have around financial assessment and charging. And they're the two areas that we have most complaints about. And they're the two areas that frustrate people the most. And they're, as Debbie's already highlighted, two areas within our existing improvement plan. So we've started to look at the website information. We've started to make that more accessible for people. We have a large piece of work in train around the customer service centre, and we are redesigning some of the channels that people can contact us on through the customer service centre. We're looking at what causes the delays that people experience when they contact us, and we're doing some work around that. And we know a lot more now about why we have delays for people hanging on telephones, and why it takes maybe 20 minutes or whatever to get through to the council. And we can bring a report back on that if that'd be helpful at a future meeting. We're doing quite a lot of work on that. As Debbie said, we've started to work on the financial assessment backlogs. So we know now that how many people we've got that are waiting for assessment, and we're working with put extra capacity in to address some of the backlogs, but we're also looking at the process itself to make sure that we're not creating delays within that. And we'll be moving on then to look at some of the issues around charging that we have and around billing. We've got the electronic billing pilot that we started last year that's now being rolled out, and we'll be looking at other areas around that cause people concern. One of the areas that is more difficult for us to address is the social contact issue. We are going to do some work with the voluntary sector, community and voluntary sector, to look at how they can support us in that area. But we don't provide or commission perhaps as much social support as other councils do. And the reason for that is that we don't have the same level of funding that some other councils have. And we have to cut our cloth accordingly. But having said that, of course, we want people to have as good a life as they can have. So we'll look at how we can address that, but it's a more difficult issue for us, I think.
Barry, just coming back on that, so something as interesting as you say, now I'm a carer for my father, but I get a call once a year from here just to catch up and say, now it'd be quite easy for you guys to just send out an email every few months, and you could send that out to everybody that's due one every few months. It would cost nothing, but it would make me think that you're keeping in touch every few months to say how's things going. Now I don't need any help, we're capable of dealing with it, but just having that little bit, it's a real simple, cheap way of doing it.
Sorry, good suggestion. We are looking at how we can also work with people who provide care to have those same conversations with people on our behalf. So rather than wait for an annual review, if you're in a care home or if you've got home care on a regular basis, could those providers do some of those reviews for us? Rather than waiting 12 months. But absolutely, we should be in contact with people on a regular basis. I agree. It would provide assurance, wouldn't it, and reassurance.
I mean, it's, phone call, that takes resource, and you've got to ring around everybody, etc. But the email thing, send that out to millions of people every 3-4 months. But to me, that would feel like you'd been in touch. And if someone was to ask me, do you feel like you're getting, I say, yeah, every few months they get in touch. And it's a pain because I don't need anything but at the same time, yeah.
Barry's saying you might produce more complaints. Just from my perspective, John, we spoke at the briefing this morning that that the points under paragraph 9, which were what came out of the things that we needed some way of just identifying as a committee that they have been incorporated in the plan, which is in the appendix. And I appreciate there's been a timing issue here, which is why it's not been done. So I think what we felt as a committee from the spokespeople there this morning was that if we could have perhaps a very short report at the next meeting or the meeting there afterwards, if it's not convenient for the next one, just to say how they've been incorporated in the appendix to make sure we've covered those points, because we were concerned that the CQC would want to see that those points that we had identified had been incorporated in our plan going forward. And then we had a discussion about the frequency of this coming back to this committee for an update. And we just felt that with the not knowing when the CQC would arrive and not wanting to shoot ourselves in the foot by not making sure we kept this under review as far as they're concerned, that perhaps if we then did that 6 monthly, if that's all right with every committee members. I think the feeling was we just need to make sure that as and when the CQC arrive, that we're not found wanting as a committee, letting our team down and our officers down by not having done our bit of keeping this under review and picking it up. So if we could please build that into the programme, we'd be grateful. But I think, as has been said, it's an excellent, very comprehensive report, which we're grateful of. And I think, we've done an awful lot of work here to get ready for the CQC meeting, which I think is great. So thanks to all the team involved in that. And I think hopefully we can just embed this so people don't, work towards a visit, that we just do this all the time. And then when a visit comes, we know we're ready without having to do any extra work. I always think it's where schools go wrong with Ofsted. They worry about the Ofsted when it arrives. If you're there all the time, you're there all the time. So thank you for that. Anyone got any further points? In which case we're interested. Oh, sorry, Christy.
Ed and I did visit the customer service centre and had a good look round and talked to some of the staff there to see how it was working, and we were very impressed, weren't we, Ted?
Yeah, it's extremely organised, and you can see how they triage cases.
Right, thanks, that Ted. Hopefully we'll pick up the point that Barry's made to see if there is something we can do with technology, just to as perhaps a quick wing. But I know we've tried to crack this nut, John, since I've been on this committee, of satisfaction with our services, and we don't quite understand. But I suppose my final point, surely the CQC have got to take some account of the funding issue, because if you're awash with money, as some councils are, and you can contact people every 3 or 4 minutes against those that don't have the money, presumably they've got to prioritise it in respect of pennies per patient. You've got other
legislative requirements, regardless of how much money or you may or may not have, how much resource you may or may not have, and therefore they assess everybody on the same basis. What they have done as part of the learning from the pilots is that they are now allowing authorities to, at the start of the assessment process, when they come on site, they're now allowing authorities to have a context setting meeting with them. That allows us to go through a little bit about Leicestershire, a little bit about the council. We can talk about things like fair funding. Whether they take any notice of that is another matter altogether, but at least they're allowing us to have the conversation. They weren't originally.
Thanks for that, John. It always makes me wonder who assesses the CQC, but we won't go there. So we're now moving on to agenda item 9, which is the report on the review of social care investment programme, which can be found in pages 63 to 82 of the report, and is with John, who is supported by Tracy Ward, Assistant Director for Access Integration and Prevention, who is online. So over to you first, John.
Thank you. So yes, as you've explained, we brought an update report on the Social Care Investment Programme. It is some time since committee had a report on this programme, which has been running now for about 5 years, and originally was developed in order to enable us as a council to ensure that people had the right accommodation to support their care and the right accommodation to keep people independent for as long as possible. We developed the programme, as I said, about 5 years ago. Obviously, a lot has changed in that time. We've had the pandemic, we've got a different economic outlook. The costs of development of housing and other forms of accommodation have spiralled. So we thought it was time to do a bit of a review of the programme. And we wanted to bring, having done that review, we wanted to bring that here for committee to be able to have sight of the review and the recommendations that come from that, not least of which was that one of the recommendations was that members should be more cited on the work that we were undertaking. So I'll hand over to Tracy, who's going to go through the detail of the report.
Yeah, thanks, John. So the purpose of the report is to invite committee to comment on the findings and recommendations following the recent review of the Council's Social Care Investment Programme, going forward known as SKIP. The report sets out how the outcome of the review will impact on the focus of the programme going forward. The main aim of that really is to develop a more strategic approach working across partnerships, so including with developers, districts and borough councils, to look at how we start to take programmes of work going forward. Paragraphs 2 through 5 outline the previous decisions regarding the programme at this committee and through Cabinet. So SKIP aligns to the ambitions and strategy for Adults and Communities Department delivering wellbeing and opportunity in Leicestershire. And the SKIP programme contributes to the delivery of a number of outcomes of the Council strategic plan, in particular safe and well, improved outcomes, stronger economy, infrastructure and transport. So just to give you some background in relation to the Social Care Investment Programme, as John stated, it was developed in 2019 and there was a development of a prospectus from 2019 to 2037 to increase the range of accommodation across the county for individuals receiving adult social care. So the SKIP programme aims to facilitate capital investment in Leicestershire over a 20-year period into accommodation-based support, and included, but not in any kind of particular order, like extra care for older people, supported living environments for working age adults, and a range of other services. The programme was established jointly, chaired by the Directors of Adults, Communities and Corporate Resources, and there are representations from various other members of the local authority on the board. So as John alluded to, there are a number of things that have impacted on the Social Care Investment Programme, namely the impact of the pandemic, increased building costs, etc. So in October 2022, the Social Care Investment Board commissioned a light touch initial review from the Council's growth team, and this focused on the programme aims and objectives, progress in meeting those aims and objectives, and how the programme was being managed. From paragraph 16 onwards, the initial findings of that review are undertaken. So the level of demand has increased in the programme, such as SKIP is still required to address the growing costs providing accommodation. The SKIP programme was intended to be focused on a whole system approach, but that initial finding was that it was very internally focused in the Adults and Communities Department. The business case and prospectus no longer reflect the current conditions in respect of market increased costs and other underlying financial assumptions. There was a lack of clarity on the purpose of the objectives of the programme and what that meant across the council. So just moving on, following that initial under review, the Council's Transformation Unit were tasked with delivering a further review. The full evaluation of the SKIP programme considered the findings of the initial review and used these to frame the detailed review based on the following themes: core priorities and objectives, the prospectus and information given to providers, staffing and resources, strategic focus with adults and communities, programme governance and relationship working. One of the key recommendations was that the review was that the changes in the wider economic environment leading to increased capital costs to build development and the pressures on the council's capital budget, the focus was best placed on shifting the overall programme from direct investment to market shaping and inward investment and development. Other recommendations are outlined in the report at paragraph 20. And paragraph 21, there's some of the kind of key developments and achievements of the SCIP programme. So just to pick out a couple of those, the delivery of 9 schemes in supporting 78 individuals, savings of 480,000. The investment prospectus was well regarded when received by providers, and the better outcomes that were achieved in relation to new placements for individuals. External review and following final recommendations. There was some work undertaken by Neil Reveley, Executive Director of Housing and Health and Adult Social Care, and Chair of the Association of Directors for Adult Social Care Services Housing Policy Network and ADAS Housing Lead. Neil presented his review to the final recommendations to the SCIP board in October 23. Attached is the appendix of Neil's report. He agreed with the findings of the recommendations of the full report, particularly regarding the focus of the SCIP. He felt that the focus on strategic commissioning and market shape on inward investment was in keeping with best practice and consistent with upper tier authorities. He stated the purpose of the SCIP moving forward should be to deliver on the vision of the development of required housing options, catering for a range of people with older and disabled needs and the citizens of Leicestershire. He also stated at paragraph 26 that the majority of the statements in the prospectus very much aligned with the strategic commissioning and inward investment approach. And Neil's opinion in relation to extra care ambitions, additional provision could only be achieved using that approach. He also stated, as he found in the initial review, the SCIP programme was intended to be focused on a whole system approach to address the challenges, but more recently a focus on the council's direct role. So Neil considered the underlying principles of the business case for the SCIP remained in place, whilst building costs had increased, so had the cost of residential care placements. Therefore, the principles to invest to save still stands. He commented on the payback periods could be longer to make investments more financially viable and linked to the housing provider practice. Other recommendations were to support capital investment and asset values for developers, capital investment to take this through of land provision. A business case to support capital investment underlying other councils have considered and demonstrated good returns on investment by virtue of significant revenue efficiencies. The proposed purpose and the focus of the SCIP board moving forward should be to provide leadership, vision and ambition and set strategic priorities for SCIP and support and drive and deliver things forward. Via case studies, the emphasis on how leadership, partnership and relationships were key to successful programmes, which is what John highlighted at the beginning of the introduction of the report. So the next steps, at the November 23 SCIP board, the Transformation Unit presented the final report, findings of the SCIP review. The report set out the vision and objectives and purpose of going forward. The programme board formally agreed this approach, and this is to deliver the vision through the development of required housing options to meet a range of needs for older and disabled people in Leicestershire, the managing and shaping of accommodation markets and securing investment from providers and developers in housing that meets the needs of older people and disabled people in Leicestershire, and to work with districts and borough councils to support and influence housing and planning strategies across the county. The management of online prospectus and ensuring that developers have detail required to influence investment decisions and understanding key client areas. That's something that is still well received. And developing business cases with housing partners where land and capital is required. So the report set out the operational next steps of the social care investment programme. And as of today, that element related to how we work across strategic commissioning means that Indy will be the assistant director taking the programme of work forward. 3 work streams established to take the work forward, and the findings from the review and the recommendations were activity support, the social care investment delivery programme and management, managing the market and scheme onboarding, and developing a partnership approach across housing and care. So just on to paragraph 34, the SCIP team is developing a programme plan to set out how it will deliver the revised vision of the social care investment programme and the refocus of the programmes in relation to market shaping. It should be noted that the work of the SCIP team continues to deliver placements in supported living and extra care development and to ensure that properties which have already been developed are maintained and occupied. The team also works to ensure that supported living is accessible to those by utilising the wide provider market. There's pipeline elements under development with 70 units being delivered through 24, 25 and 25. So paragraph 37, the current resources related to the social care investment programme are outlined. And in conclusion, the SCIP's achieved some positive outcomes over the past 3 years, providing 9 schemes and places for 78 individuals, changes in the wider economic environment, the financial position of the council, and learning from best practice elsewhere has led to the conclusion that the SCIP should focus on less on direct provision of accommodation and move to a more strategic commissioning and inward focusing investment approach. So the key recommendation of the review is that SCIP should refocus its work from looking and working with a strategic landlord to direct fund and develop properties in order to provide more stock of supported accommodation, and to take a more strategic commissioning approach to how we work with developing schemes in Leicestershire. So the committee, as John said, are invited to comment on the findings of the review, the programme, and the future focus of the social care investment programme going forward. Just one final element in relation to equality implications, as the report focuses on how SCIP will operate going forward and does not impact on the quality of services provided, there are no equality implications arising from the recommendations within the report.
Thank you, Tracy. Barry?
Thank you, Chair. Just to sort of get a feel for how successful the scheme's been, we've supported 78 individuals, saved 480k at 6k a head. What sort of percentage saving is that? You know, that 480k, what would the price have been without that?
I think one of the things that the report doesn't include in relation to this is some of the costs for ongoing residential care placements. Some of the placements that we've also made in respect of supported living are also stepped through. So there might be people who require significant elements of support around, say, their mental health needs initially, but the programme seeks to work with those individuals and providers to reduce the cost over time.
But putting it into real terms, if it's £480,000 what we've saved, what would we have spent for those 78 individuals if we hadn't had SCIP in place?
Well, the easy answer to that is another £480,000. So I suppose on average, if you look at averages are misleading things often, aren't they? But on average, we spend around about £1,500 a week on a residential care placement for these clients, and we'll probably get supported living for maybe £100 a week, £100 to £200 a week cheaper. But having said that, and averages are, as I said, often misleading, because sometimes actually moving somebody to supported living could be more expensive, but it could still be the right thing to do for the individual. And part of the reason we do it is obviously because we think it's better to use capital to invest where we can make a revenue saving. But also we do it because it improves people's lives and it gives people a better quality of life. So there are those two issues, really.
Bill?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes. It's an interesting programme. We've got quite a few of these places now. Is there still demand for them? You know, we've got to turn the equation upside down. We've got to invest more, but is there demand for that use or not? And how is it affecting people who are living in those accommodations? Because only certain people can afford to live there because of the on costs of living in that accommodation, which is not covered by housing benefits. So you're targeting to a section of the community that might not be able to afford the accommodation you're aiming at.
Actually, let's start with that one. So there are largely two elements to the programme. One is supported living, which is largely for people who are of working age, and extra care, which is largely aimed at people who are 65 plus, although not entirely. 55 plus is generally seen as being appropriate for extra care. In terms of supported living, we know that there is, we still have people who are known to us who want to move into independent living. We know there is a high demand, and we still have a couple of 300 people of that age group who are living in long-term 24-hour care. not all of whom need to be there. So the demand for that service is definitely there, and it says we've got another 70 properties coming on stream over the next 2 years. I have absolutely no doubt that those properties will all be fully utilised. In terms of the extra care, we have fewer extra care beds than do other authorities per head of population. Extra care isn't something that has been seen as being a real alternative to long-term care in Leicestershire, whereas in other authorities it is. So there is some work that we need to do with the wider population, with people who use our services and with families, but also with our own staff internally, to ensure that people are aware of the benefits of extra care and the benefits that extra care can bring. In terms of the costs, most of the costs are in fact met by housing benefit, and people who live in extra care can get enhanced levels of housing benefit to cover some of those extra elements. That I'm not saying that covers the entirety of the cost, but you can get some of those costs met. But it's also about quality of life. And given, there are, I suppose, there are pros and cons, aren't there? Like all things, there are benefits and there are disbenefits. So, for example, if you were to go into residential care and you had assets above X amount, and we would expect you to contribute all of those towards your care costs, wouldn't we? If you're living in the community, those charges, that charging regime is very different. And extra care is classed as community, not long-term care. So therefore, you would have a different approach to how you would perhaps manage your overall asset base or your overall revenue, your overall income. It's a very different kind of scenario. And for some people, that would be much more appealing, I would suggest, than perhaps having to sell a home or what have you. So I think there are, it's an individual decision, isn't it? And we have to assess each person on an individual basis, I think.
Sure.
Cheers, thank you very much, Care. Talking about extra care, I don't know if it was this plan, but it's definitely delivered in my division. At Derby Road, we did an extra care facility. It's really, really good. If anybody has a chance to go and have a look at it, I would recommend it. It's in a good location, and it's full. I think it's always been full. So I can see the positives of this kind of plan being in place and then delivering. What I want to question is the feasibility of this kind of plan and delivering in this economic climate, especially when costs have gone up astronomically in the building trade. So I know this is a bit of a refresh and of the current plan, but it's coming to an end soon. I think it's a year left-ish. So what's the thoughts of when the new plan comes in, being able to deliver extra care projects or such projects across the across Leicestershire, basically? Are we going to have a plan, or is it going to be something, a bit different, a bit more of what we can meet?
Can I go first? Colleagues might want to join in. Yes, as Tracy said in the presentation, we are going to look at refreshing the investment prospectus, which is essentially the supply and demand document that drives what we think we need across Leicestershire over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And we'll be doing that in concert with the district council and borough councils, who obviously have the responsibility for the local plans. There's also a new piece of legislation which came out last year, which requires district and borough councils and county councils there's a duty of cooperation there around assessing need for supported accommodation in each district and borough. And that has to feature now legislatively within local plans, I think. So we will be doing that work to refresh that, and we'll ensure that we've got a good grasp of what we think the demand is going forward and the requirements going forward. In terms of extra care, yeah, I would agree with you. The provision Waterside on Derby Road is a very good facility. Some of the modern ones that we have built in the last few years, Oak Court, Waterside, are very good. We have some older provision which is not quite so good in the county, and we have some areas of the county where we don't have any extra care or very little extra care. So Hinckley and Bosworth is an area where we don't have any provision. So we do have sites that we are looking at developing. We've got a site in northwest Leicestershire. We've got a site in Hinckley and Bosworth that we want to develop that the council owns. We've got a site in Melton that the council has just sold to a private developer who wants to develop extra care. So there is still some areas there for investment. The way it stacks up, it depends on the nature of the developer, actually. So most of the developers will want some form of contribution from the council, or from councils, plural, whether it's the district and borough, or whether it's the county. Partly because it helps them in terms of their ability to then secure additional funding through Homes England and other organisations, or from their own lenders, partly because we want nomination rights. So if we want to secure the right to nominate people to go into those accommodations, we might have to make a contribution towards the costs. It could be land, it could be capital. And it depends on the provider as to how much of that they would require. So if it's a private developer who's coming along with their own lenders and their own capital, they might not need the same level as maybe a housing association registered provider who's reliant on Homes England funding, and it does vary. But and it says in the report, we just need to make sure we've got appropriate business cases in place to make sure that they all stack up financially.
Yeah, John, just to kind of build on those elements, one of the things that I was going to add in, that some of the things that Neil did around development of extra cares in other organisations is about that preventative method of pre-admissions to residential care. And we've had quite a lot of success regarding people who are placed in discharge to assess beds and moving into extra care rather than remaining in residential care. And I think one of the other things is just to give committee an overview is that we're working with legal services, procurement and property services about those two sites that John's identified.
Let's come back, Bill.
Thank you. Just one thing that before we finish, at the moment we've got sort of one provider looking after these things. When we move forward, are we going to keep to one provider, or are we going to be more, is it going to be spread across the field a bit more?
Yeah, I think in the paper it refers to NCHA as our strategic partner. I think moving forward, that's something that isn't necessarily going to be the case. So we've got new developers coming forward. They may have their own housing association. They'll do a separate care provider. So we're open to different options moving forward.
Okay.
Yeah, just to clarify that one, we use NCHA as our strategic landlord. The reason for that is that the county council isn't a housing authority, and therefore we can't rent or let. We don't have the power in the way the district or borough councils would or do. So we have to have a registered provider act on our behalf. And therefore we have NCHA to do that for us for the properties that we own as a council. In terms of development, we're completely agnostic about who the developer is. It'll be whoever has the best business case that's brought forward. If we tender out a piece of land, or if we tender out a development, we'll invite bids from all comers. If a developer approaches us, we're very happy to talk to any developer that might be wanting to develop extra care services. And obviously, as you know, there's a heck of a lot of housing growth in Leicestershire over the next few years. Some of those bigger developments we would expect to see as part of their Section 106, or as part of their SIL, or as part of their development for social housing. We'd expect to see extra care as part of that.
Thank you for that, John. I think Tracy quite rightly made the point right at the start about partnership working is the key to this moving forward. And certainly, I think with in an area where there's two-tier authorities, particularly where the second tier are the planning authority, etc., I think we need a great deal of collaboration, which is why I'm slightly concerned about page 81, where it talks about potential establishment of a strategic housing group, including districts and boroughs, and then it talks about potential housing group, whereas I would have thought it was essential there was a housing group. Now, we are asked as a committee to comment on the recommendation, which is made in page 67. Find it. Never find things when you're looking for them, can you? Recommendations a bit further down, isn't it? Oh, well, wherever it is. Anyway, so we're asked to comment on recommendations. So I think, to me, the recommendation is that we must have collaborative working. We must include the planning authorities in this. The planning authorities are responsible for their local plans. And this is quite a good time, actually, with almost every district and borough council going through their local plans led by Charnwood at the moment and being followed by the others. So I think we would like to see that integration of a team to look at this, because I think there are great opportunities. I think you hit the nail on the head, John, that where we are looking for sustainable development across the county delivered by the district and boroughs, to have a sort of cradle to grave development which has extra care facilities, supported living, perhaps living facilities for people with learning difficulties, supported accommodation. I think it's crucial that we work together. So I would happily make the recommendation that we must, as a council, lead that partnership with particular districts and boroughs and others to try and get the right sort of housing across the county for all our residents, because I think John again hit the nail on the head. I know somebody who went into Oak Court in Blaby for the last 2.5 years of their life, and the difference between them from the day they went in, where they had very little, if any, quality of life, they had 2.5 years of fabulous life in Oak Court, and having seen the difference that this accommodation makes, I would want to have that accommodation option for everybody that can, because it just made such a difference for somebody who had very little quality of life to someone who had a fabulous quality of life, and a family that were happy because they knew their resident was getting the best possible support and accommodation. So if committee are happy, I think we should make the recommendation. We welcome the report. We do understand that the county have no option but to we haven't got the money to carry on building. We know that from the budget that's just been passed. So we do understand the real world we live in, that the capital funding isn't available, but perhaps the way we can encourage more development is by that working in partnership across, as I said, particularly between us as the county and the districts and boroughs, to try and get the right housing in the right place, to leverage 106 if possible, to leverage perhaps developers donating land even, which really does cut down the cost of a development for anyone who might want to build it. Are the committee happy with those recommendations to go forward? And on the basis of that, then I think paragraph 41 just needs to be reworded to actually accommodate those things which both John and Tracy have said throughout the presentation, which I don't think has been adequately reflected. It's there in the body of the report. I don't think it's adequately reflected in paragraph 41, if we could just do that. Everybody happy? That's brilliant. So thank you, Tracy.
Thank you. Bye.
We're now moving on to agenda item 10, which is the report on the nursing care provision in Leicestershire, which is pages 83 to 90. And I think we got John supported by Indy on this one. For what I think is an excellent report. I say that up front. I don't normally comment up front, but it's one of the best worded reports I've ever read. But over to you, John.
Very kind. Thank you very much. Yes, so, and this is a report that committee had asked for, following a couple of reports last year on, I think we brought a report on the Market Sustainability Fund, where we were talking about the one area of our care markets, which is of a concern at that point, was nursing care. Well, two areas: nursing care and extra care. We just discussed extra care, and a second report that we brought in terms of the quality of care, where we were looking at the capacity within the nursing care market, particularly, and how that market was funded. So you asked us to bring a further report forward, which Indy will just take you through the detail of. Indy.
Thanks, John. So hi everyone. So I'm going to provide a bit of a summary position of the nursing care report today. So The first sections detail the policy frameworks, and as John alluded to, members have received reports on the fair cost of care and the Market Sustainability Fund, which detail our support to the care market in general. Paragraph 7 in the report details our care home market. So you'll see you've got just over 150 care homes, of which 27 are nursing providers, and we fund just over 200 nursing placements. Across Leicestershire, it's a pretty strong self-funder market. So people with their own funds buying their own care from care providers, and the NHS also commission some placements off their own back in terms of people that are fully CHC funded. The report goes on to detail the low numbers of people receiving health funding across funded nursing care, fully CHC funding, and also end of life placements. It also details that LLRs markedly lower in terms of NHS funding per capita and numbers. That's in paragraph 42 across the East Midlands. I'll come on to that in a second, but I'll just we'll just kind of brief that. Paragraphs 18 to 24 provide an overview of the market position around CQC status, something on provider exits, and information on how the NHS commissions short-term placements to support hospital discharge. Paragraph 25 details or onwards details the change we made around nursing care. So again, as John alluded to, in October we introduced a new nursing rate for care homes at £900 a week, and that's part of our Market Sustainability Improvement Fund. And this section also provides details of the work commissioned by the ICB around working with local authorities across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland around the NHS funding issue. And as John said, members, you've heard before here that we're quite disappointed with the position of the report that was sent to us, and we're considering our next steps around that, and we can go into that discussion in a second. However, on a more positive note, over the past 12 months we've seen some better outcomes around health funded placements. That's detailed in paragraphs 38 to 39. It shows across a 24-month period that we've had a slight increase in those funding decisions. As alluded to just now, so the report in paragraph 42 onwards provides details of the benchmarking information around NHS funding. It's a start reading, even for those at end of life stages. So we're seeing that we do provide support as a council to people who are at end of life from hospital, but those fast track numbers, those fast track CHC numbers are low in any case. They're not consistent with the rest of the country. There's a case, and we're quite clear on this, that we feel that in a number of placements that the NHS should be funding elements of those placements. That's reflected in some of our care costs in our residential homes, but also the numbers just don't stack. In paragraphs 32 and 33, it talks around our care home market and the fact that it's smaller than it should be across care homes in general, but also in our nursing provision, and that's across city and county. So we've seen some provider exits as well, which has impacted that. And I guess if you're a developer wanting to build within the county, or you might approach us and say, what do you think, and what they might do some market analysis. I guess from their perspective, if they're looking at nursing homes, they'd look at the numbers and say, actually, this isn't going to stack for us because you don't fund, or the NHS doesn't fund nursing placements. So where's that kind of circle, and when you're going to come from? So I guess in conclusion, as I said just now, we are considering our position with the ICB. Members are asked to note the contents of the report and kind of where we want to go with this. And I know, Councillor Richardson, you're particularly interested in this area of work and have mentioned it a few times. And we welcome your thoughts really on the contents of the report and our position with the ICB.
Thank you, Indy. I think living with the health portfolio holder doesn't exactly do anything for my blood pressure. Leon.
Thank you. For quite some time now, we are talking about actually lack of nursing homes in Leicestershire. I mean, this is not new. We have been talking about the last 2 years. And practically, I don't really see a solid plan to increase this number. And this lack of nursing homes has a serious direct impact on the NHS services in East Midlands and Leicestershire. We say, or we imply actually sometimes the NHS services are not good enough, but you see the NHS services are impacted by the fact that we don't have nursing homes. So patients are lumped in the hospital, there are no beds, we delay treatment and all these things. So the provision of nursing homes is of paramount importance, and I personally don't see a good plan to increase this number. Can you give me an idea how can we improve things, please?
So I'll start off and you can do the detail. They are exactly the conversations we're having with NHS colleagues, because we agree entirely with you that the nursing care home market is not as robust as it should be. We agree entirely with you that that will have an impact in terms of the overall provision of health and care and the flow of people through different health and care services. It is a market where independent providers, independent organisations, be they private providers or be they charitable organisations or other forms of organisation, provide the care. And those providers, as Indy said, are going to look at these figures and they're going to say, well, if I've got £10 million plus, that's what it costs to develop a nursing home now. If I've got to invest 10 to 15 million pounds, am I going to go to Leicestershire, where for every 50,000 population, there are 35 people getting nursing funding? Or am I going to go to Derbyshire, where the figure's 110? I'm probably going to go to Derbyshire to invest my 10 to 15 million, because I've got a much better chance of getting a return on my investment, haven't I? So it is a significant issue. And we did get to a point a couple of years ago, a couple of winters ago, where we were on the verge of running out of nursing beds, actually. I think that position has stabilised a little bit since then. There have been a couple of developments, I think, in the city, but the problem we've got there is that, again, because of the cost of development and because the market is so weak in terms of supply, most of those nursing care investors will aim for the self-funder market rather than the health and care market, because they can charge £1,500 a week to an individual for a nice new home. It'll look great. I'm sure it is great. I'm not casting any aspersion on the care. But if you're funding your own care, chances are you're going to want to go to a nice new home with new facilities and state-of-the-art equipment, and that's got, and you'd be prepared to pay for it. And as a local authority, it's very difficult for us to compete. So it is a significant issue, and we do need to address it as a whole health and care community. Absolutely, don't disagree at all. Anything you want to add?
I think you've covered most of it, and I think, going on your point, we have had discussions with the ICB around how we kind of instigate this market across LLR. And it's not a straightforward piece. So that kind of instigated the piece of work around the NHS funding, which is, as John kind of said, that is having an impact on us, trying to stimulate a market that I guess doesn't want to play with us at the moment. I agree, as John said, and I agree with you that we have got a shortage. The numbers are stark. The reductions are stark. We had a provider exit the city recently-ish, and that impacts us. We place with the city loads, and they place with us as well. So I guess any cross-border issues, we don't see it as a cross-border. We see it as a city and council approach. So when they lose, we lose, and vice versa. It's something we need to address 100%. But until we get down to the fundamentals of kind of the funding issue, that's something we need to address pretty clearly.
Nick. Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've just got one question before I bring it back up now. I've just got two questions, actually. One is on section 18 there, the 5 required improvement. Who actually oversees to make sure that is done to bring those up to standard. That I'll do that one question first, then I'll come back with the second one. Thank you.
Yeah, so within my team, I've got a quality improvement team. So that's people that go out, work with providers, develop action plans, visit, check, support, ongoing to make sure that we get the requires improvement up to at least good.
Thank you. Then my second question is regarding nursing place homes, what we've just been, obviously Leo's just brought a book about. I believe there's one being built just down the road there. Does that fit into the target of what we're looking for in this? I believe that's got for 70 places, is it? The one just down on Groovy Road, about literally a mile in that direction, has just been granted planning permission to be built, I believe.
Yes, yes, I'm not sure myself whether it's a residential registration or a nursing registration, but if it were nursing, then it may well help, subject to the comments I made earlier about the fact that most new nursing developments tend to market themselves towards people who fund their own care rather than the local authorities. But I'm sure that if we'd want to have a conversation with them, absolutely.
Just on that point. So we do have providers or developers that approach us and have that discussion with us. We do speak to our colleagues across the districts as well. Sometimes we do hear about developments that are kind of upcoming, and we do get into strategic conversations with them. Sometimes it kind of unwinds into actually a nursing provision might not make sense for them. They might target a more residential or more of the self-funded market. So the discussions may start off as yes, we can develop a nursing home, but actually they sometimes slowly dwindle down to actually this doesn't make sense for us. So they'll change their same usage, same class, but actually a different target.
Thank you for that. Now we are asked to, there's a recommendation on page 88, I think it is it 88? Look at that, I've got it right for once. That the committee is asked to note the contents of the report and comment on the nursing care market position, in particular funding issues on the ICB. I think, as Indy says, this is something that does concern me, and the reason I think the report is so valuable, if for nothing else, is the chart under paragraph 42, which I think lays bare the irrefutable proof that we are our residents across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland are disadvantaged compared to our neighbouring counties massively. And I think, as John has already explained, if you were looking to build a nursing home, unless you've got expectation of NHS funding for a lot of these placements, why would you come and build a nursing home in Leicestershire? Well, you wouldn't. I think it's chicken and egg without the ICB moving. Now, one would like to think that when faced with evidence, particularly in those two charts, and I think whilst Indy said it very quietly, the bit that alarmed me was the fast track figure, which is for people at end of life who urgently need care, which should be being provided by the NHS. And clearly our residents are being massively disadvantaged against those in neighbouring counties. I know that Christine, as the portfolio holder, and the whole of Cabinet are concerned, massively concerned about this issue. So, what I would recommend to the committee, if you are inclined to go that way, is that in the strongest possible terms, we add our support to our Cabinet colleagues that are fighting tooth and nail to get the right support. And I'm not talking about, any more than other people are expecting. I'm talking about the right support and the same support for the residents of Leicestershire and Leicester, that we would call upon the ICB to urgently review why it is that they believe that the funding they provide in this part of the world should be far lower than anywhere else, because it is just indefensible, and worse still, morally indefensible, that residents, particularly those at end of care, and I just want to get that. I didn't realise when I first saw the fast track column what fast track meant, and I think perhaps we need to, the one point about the report I think that needs expanding on is to explain that to a layman what fast track means, because that figure horrified me when I looked at the percentage there of 49%, and the next one up is 77%. That is just, statistically impossible. So if members are happy, I think on the strongest possible terms on behalf of all of us, can we put forward that recommendation that we support our officers, particularly John and Indy, we support our cabinet colleagues, particularly Christine, in doing all we can to raise the profile of this injustice, and I think injustice is not too strong a word for this, which has been delivered onto our residents wrongly. Are all members of the committee happy that I feel quite strongly about this? Well, in fact, no, I don't. I feel very strongly about this, that this is wrong and we need to do all we can to address the issue. Are you all comfortable with that? Thank you very much, committee. Thank you, Indy. We're now moving on to the final agenda item. All going swimmingly up to now. Fran walks wearily to the table. We're on to the last agenda item 11, which is the report on the update on the Archives Collection and Learning Centre, pages 91 to 98 of the agenda. Clearly it's one that we've had several times before, although this bit has come back just on the really this part of the system, because it doesn't include the museum's collection, particularly in this part, in the same way it has done. So John will introduce, and then Fran, in the usual way, will take us through and no doubt depress us. Very nicely.
Thanks, Chair. I'm very happy to pass straight to Fran to depress us, actually. That's okay with Fran.
Thank you. What an introduction. Yeah, so this is an update paper on the ACL Centre. As you remember, you received a paper, this committee received a paper in November around the direction of travel, which was to develop the ACL Centre proposals and look to seek capital to progress those. As you've already made reference to this afternoon already, you'll be well aware that the council's financial position is particularly challenging. We've also met with our partners in the Record Office, the City and Rutland, whose financial position is equally difficult, and therefore it's felt that at the current time there is not sufficient capital to progress the ACL Centre at the moment. That doesn't mean that the underlying problems that we were looking to address for the ACL Centre have gone away. We've still got the issues around sufficient storage and adequate storage conditions to resolve. But what we have decided to do is separate out the two elements of that provision. So look at the issues to do with our partnership area, so the Record Office provision, which is delivered in partnership, and the museum collections separately. They are both referenced briefly in this report, that there's not, we are at an early stage. So we have met with officers from Leicester City and Rutland County Council to talk through options, and paragraph 18 of your report really highlights options that are in consideration with regard to the Record Office, and we have discussed those with the National Archive, which is the lead body for the archive sector. It's worth pointing out all of those options make the assumption that we retain or we continue to stay in the building in Long Street in Wigston, which would necessitate some investment in that building because our intention had been to vacate, so we haven't been spending money on the maintenance of that building, but that would now need to be addressed if we're going to stay. And then separately, in terms of museum collections, there is an opportunity potentially to follow a scaled back version of some of the intention of the ACL Centre, which should be to reduce the number of storage facilities that we currently work in and bring those some of those into the County Hall campus in the Eastern Annex. That would have the benefit of releasing a building that could be sold as a capital asset if that was a decision taken, and also 2 further units that could be released back into the Investing in Leicestershire programme. So that information is in paragraphs 21 to 24. And in terms of sort of timescales, we had our inspection from the TNA on the 5th of February, and we know that their panel is meeting soon, or has met, I'm not entirely sure of the date, and we should get the outcome of our Record Office accreditation assessment sort of imminently. There is some information in paragraphs 31 to 33 in terms of resource implications. The detail in terms of revenue costs for the different options hasn't been worked up at this stage because we're still very much at the beginning, but there's some indication of costs in there. And I would probably leave it at that point and ask for comments.
Thank you very much, Fran. Barry?
Thank you, Chair. It's very disappointing, really, to read what's happening. You know, we talk in other reports how we try and do everything we can to make sure we keep staff happy, retention of staff. We must have pulled our staff from pillar to post with what's been going on this over the last few years. I can appreciate that you've split it out because you're looking at this as one thing because of the partnership, etc. I probably would have preferred to have still had one report, even split into two, so I can get a whole holistic look at the whole thing and the issues. It just feels like it's a sticking plaster that we're doing, that, you know, we'll spend some money on Wigston to try and bring it up to spec, but I've seen Wigston, I've seen what you need to do to really bring it up. You know? And all we're going to end up doing, because our partners don't seem to want to put anything into it either, is to just do a sticking plaster for now to keep things going. And, you know, I think the original intention with the centre was the right way to go, and how we're drawing back from it's just so disappointing to see. Something I'm a Londoner. I've lived through them. I lived my school days through museums. School holidays are always at the museums, and so it's been something I've really been keen on. And when I got involved in this, it's really nice to see what we had and what we were intending to do with it. It's so disappointing each time you get a report to see how we're just drawing back from that time and time and time again. The funds just not there, and then, you know, as you say, in the moment the funds aren't there, but the funds will never be there in the future. So realistically, we're just saying it's not going to happen because we're not going to have the funds. If we don't do it at some time, we're never going to do it.
Nick?
Thanks, Chair. My turn to carry on from them comments. Obviously, regarding that sticky plaster on Wigston, is there any chance of having some rough idea of figures? Idea one, what the building's worth, how much of a sticky plaster we need to stick onto that building, and if we put that sticky plaster on it, what's it worth when we've done that, please? Just rough.
No, that's fine. Actually, if you look in paragraph 20 of your report, there is actually a specific figure that is relatively accurate. So that is based on an assessment of having reviewed the condition of the building, the essential works that really need to take place over the next sort of 1 to 3 years. So that's just over 1.7 million. I am going to try and remember the capital value of the record office is about 950,000, because that was in the last report as a capital receipt. And everyone is always surprised that it's not higher, but I think that is the figure. I can double check that for you, Chair, but it is a lot less. So the obvious connection is that we would be investing more than the building would be worth. I would state that's partly because strong rooms are quite expensive and they're not very practical for anybody other than a record office to use.
Come back on. So I really don't get that. So 900,000. A building worth 900,000, we've spent 1.7 million on it. Just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But if we're going to build and do work with a strong room there, can't we start the works at the East Annex with that 1.7 million and put the strong room and move part of it over and then sell that building? Because for me, anyone in any form of business would never spend £1.7 million on an asset worth 900,000. It just doesn't make sense. And sorry, I think Cabinet need to look at this and realise it's just nuts. I'm sorry, but I think it is.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Yeah, I don't remember it being quite as high as 900 actually, but I think less. But anyway, I'll go with Fran's memory will be better than mine. So the works that we need to do are partly because we haven't done any for some time on the basis, Fran said, that we thought we might be moving out of the building. And they are, you know, some of these are quite essential works. So the heating system is failing. And you can't have an archive with a failing heating system. That's one of the key areas. So we're going to have to replace the boilers and the heating system. Windows are failing. And again, you know, from an environmental perspective, they've got to be shored up. We know we've got floor loading issues in terms of the weight on the floors. all of these things are going to need to be addressed. The value of the site is just the value of the site. It doesn't have great access. Actually, although it's in it's a fairly central location, its access is pretty poor. And whatever we do to the site, we're not going to really increase the value of that site. It would be sold as a site for development, I would have thought. I think any potential buyer is likely to want to develop on it as opposed to utilize it. But we have to do those works because we have to maintain the archive. Could we use that money to start to build an archive on County Hall? The problem with building a new archive is you can't build it in stages. You've got to build it as an entire unit, and that's 20 million of the 30 million cost is the archive. So we are, working with partners on what we can do around that. But as it stands at the moment, none of the partners have the capital contribution to be able to put to one side for £20 million worth of cost.
Bill?
With respect, it's typical of councils not to maintain buildings, isn't it, till the last possible minute. If it had been maintained properly over the number of years, we're faced with this bill you've got now. What else would County Council have got well maintained? Because we may not want it in a few years' time. No? We are where we are, Chair, and there's ways of getting out of the situation. But I think at the moment the Records Office will stay where it is, and we'll just do the works and make it waterproof and heated and everything else. But if we maintained it in the first place, we won't be in this situation now.
Starts a couple of questions. I mean, over the years, obviously, we've had the inspection. We know that we're getting closer now to losing our accreditation, potentially because of how we store the records. How confident are we that if we did this work, we would keep that accreditation? Because, I've been to the building. I'm not convinced that even with the works you're talking about, we would keep the accreditation, particularly with the floor loadings and other factors which we can't do anything about. So what is the likelihood of keeping that accreditation? If we lose the accreditation, what will be the anticipated costs that we would encounter in that accreditation, or in losing that accreditation? Because it just strikes me that we've reached a stage where, from the comments made by my colleagues, that we've reached a stage where we can't really put this off anymore. Now, there's always an argument that you can't find the money. It may be that this is one of those times when perhaps we have to look at selling off non-performing assets to raise the money to do this once and for all and get it out of the way. Now, I appreciate our partners are not keen to contribute, but presumably were we to move it, they would be forced to pay an appropriate rental for the use of the facility that was going up, in which we could claw back some of those costs through the rental. Is that possible? I mean, if you can take those few questions first, then we'll see where we're going.
Yeah. In terms of likelihood, I don't want to sort of second guess what decision the TNA will make, but we have had some really useful open sort of discussions with them, and they're appreciative of the fact that we've been quite upfront. The challenge around accreditation is their principal concern is around the care of the public record. So the maintenance of the building is one issue. The biggest problem in terms of the retention of accreditation is around the fact that we don't have any expansion space. So even if we invest the 1.7 million into the current site, that doesn't address the future storage issue. And it also doesn't address the fact that we've currently got a significant amount of material in non-compliant storage. So as you see in the paper here, what it suggests is in addition to that investment in the existing building, we would need to look to procure external archival compliant storage as well. If we do that, and I don't have a cost for you yet, that's a piece of work that we're looking at the moment, then I believe that would be compliant in terms of we would be storing the public record in an appropriate location. The challenge with that solution is whether or not we can provide public access to those collections. So whilst those collections could be made accessible for statutory purposes, so subject access requests or freedom of information, the way that people currently come and use the Record Office and its material, i.e. you can turn up, you don't have to book, and you can request and we will pretty much allow you, bring you whatever you want on the day, is not going to be possible. And we might have to have discussions about actually areas of records being closed off, but they would be cared for into the future. In terms of costs, if we lose accreditation, I don't know until we get there. The potential is, as we've always said, is that the TNA would come back and say, if you cannot keep these records in compliant storage, we will do that for you and we recharge you for the cost of doing that. But that doesn't apply to everything that is held in the Record Office. Some formally forms part of the public record and some is things like diocesan records, regimental records, which are very important for the history of Leicestershire, and I don't think anyone would suggest that we would dispose of. So it is quite complicated in terms of that, and obviously there are the separate issues in there that are in the sort of latter part of the report around the museum collections and how we ensure that, you know, those can continue to be cared for sort of appropriately. And we're not looking for expansion space there, but we are saying, how do we address the fact that the conditions in some of those buildings are really poor, but there's possibly a more straightforward solution to some of those things.
So I'll just come back on that. So what we're saying is that we could spend £2-3 million and actually be not much further forward. We might lose the accreditation, particularly on access. We haven't got the server storage. People won't be able to use it. So what's the point? Which is sort of going backwards. Whereas if we grasped the nettle as we should have done, 5 years ago when it was 17 million to build, this would have all been out the way by now. Is that a fair assessment? Not putting you on the spot. I'll pass over to Barry.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I can appreciate why you're saying you don't want to split things up, but at the same time, if our partners aren't prepared to put money in the end, we're here to look after the residents of Leicestershire and the records of Leicestershire. And here we are with the records from Leicester and Rutland that we're having to look after. Now, you're talking about having to have additional buildings to be able to take care. Well, to be quite honest, I can't see why those additional buildings can't be in Rutland and Leicester. And the stuff that you put across into those additional buildings is the stuff that belongs to Rutland and Leicester. And then you start to create the room at Wigston for our own records. So if it's got to be done that way, if that's what you've got to do, I'd rather see 2 buildings being gone up. I'd rather see 2 other councils paying for those buildings to go up and for their stuff to be gradually transferred. If we have to split at this point, because it's the only way we can make sure that we can look after our own stuff and that we've got a future in that, then to my mind, although that might not be desirable, I think is indeed, I'd actually probably look at seriously going down that route. If our partners then change their mind and say, actually, we would like to contribute and keep it all together, then great. But at the moment, I kind of feel like they're playing hardball and don't want to get involved, and they're leaving it all on us to take care of it. And I don't, as a businessman, I'd be pushing back on that quite hard.
I think I read a question in there, which is how feasible would it be to give them their own records back?
Well, Fran will have more detail on that than I will. The partnership has been in place since local authority reorganisation. It makes sense at a number of levels to continue to have an LLR record office, because many of the records span across the city, the county and Rutland. I mean, obviously some are pertaining to particular places, but others pertain to the whole area. Some of those records that, as Fran has said, you know, like the diocesan record, well, is that a city record or is that a county record? How would you split a diocesan record between 3 local authorities when the diocesan covers all 3, for example? Similar with some of the regimental records, we wouldn't really want to get into splitting those down into separate. It would take an awful lot of work to go through the whole of the records and to, in effect, sort of divvy them up. That would be a big piece of work that we would have to undertake, and there would be a fairly large revenue implication of doing that, let alone the implications of running three records officers, which is in effect what we'd be doing. But equally, it's an option that's in there that, as we've said, is not desirable, is not our preferred option, but it is an option that, and it has been part of the conversation with partners. Anything else to add to that?
Before I bring Nick back in, what does the actual agreement with the other two parties say they are responsible for? Because we talk about agreement, we're talking about the fact they are saying they don't want to contribute. What are they liable to contribute under the agreement? So has anyone read the agreement? And if so, I mean, it might be something this committee might welcome a sight of, but what does it actually say are their responsibilities for the buildings that they're housed in? Because they surely can't just walk away and say, well, we're not prepared to chip in, when clearly the accommodation for the records is not suitable, and it's their records as well as ours.
Thank you. And I suppose to be fair to colleagues at the City and Rutland, they're not saying they're not prepared to contribute at all. What they've said is they don't have sufficient capital to deliver the ACL centre itself. So all of the conversations have been clear. If we're not pursuing that, then we're going to see revenue costs go up. I don't think anybody's happy about seeing revenue costs go up, and we've not been specific about figures, but I don't think they specifically said they won't contribute at all. The partnership agreement is based on revenue contributions, so it does cover all of the revenue costs associated with running the record office, including the staff. It is quite a historic document itself now, so actually some of the terminology feels like it's a little bit out of date, but it does cover sort of all of the running costs, so all of the utility costs, maintenance costs, as well as those staffing costs. And the way that we manage that is we meet with them regularly, and that's got has been much better managed in recent years, so that we're able to get all of those core below the line costs that sit within the county council. They're reattributed, so we estimate the budget at the start of the year. That's what they pay on a quarterly basis as a contribution to, and then we do a reconciliation piece of work after all of our budgets have closed at the end of year, and then either there's an additional contribution because the year where we re-levelled the floor in the strong room, that meant we spent more than we anticipated, so partners made an additional contribution. And actually in some years, perhaps during COVID, where we didn't spend as much as we did, partners got a rebate. So I think the agreement is relatively robust in terms of those revenue costs. What it doesn't do is make a provision for capital development.
Just for I bring Nick in, so are we saying that if we spent this 1.7 million, they would contribute nothing to it? Or what would be their share of that 1.7 million? So
the costs are on a proportionate basis. So the county council make 55% contribution, the city make 35% contribution, and Rutland make 10%, and that's for all sort of costs. Obviously, we have discussions in advance with partners in terms of what that's going to be each year, and that is we are a partnership, so we don't just make the charge and then say you're going to have to suck it up. We'll have that discussion, and we do regularly, or we have had discussions where partners have come and said, is it possible to deliver a saving, or we've explored options, and sometimes we can take them forward and sometimes we can't. So we do try to deliver that as a partnership in discussion, but if the partners agree that work needs to be done, it's essential, then that's shared proportionately.
Thank you, Chair. Right, here we go. So our proportional part of that then is 900,000 is probably what we've got to find out of that 1.7 million, just in a rough maths, to spend on a building worth 900,000. So we've got 1.8 million there. So that 20 million to build the record office is down to 18 million already. Now, what would the costs be for Rutland and the city if we said we've got to hand your records back? They've got nowhere to keep them, so they've got to build a building. So wouldn't that be putting pressure on them to donate a little bit more? And I actually agree with the chairman that we have to look at our non-profit making assets to look at, and this project needs to actually go ahead, and we've got to put pressure on, because we're just putting sticky plaster on something what's going to need a new roof in another year or 2 years' time or something else. And it's just an absolute waste of that money going forward. And I think if we put pressure onto the partners and pressure onto the cabinet to look at where we go forward with this and actually start this project at last, in my opinion.
Clearly, we have an unhappy committee. So that's something that my brain ran this. I'm still trying to understand. So if we're saying the building is completely unsuitable, which basically is, we're putting sticking plasters on it, and we said we've got to move the records office, they would be liable for 45% of that, wouldn't they? Whether they liked it or not, they would have to pay 45%. So were we to bring the collection here, the cost to us is out the 30 million or whatever the last evidence was for whatever, would be 15 or 16 million. We've got 900,000 back for the building. We've saved $1 million by not putting our share in. You know, I mean, it doesn't take a lot to raise the rest of the capital. So I suppose our view, tell me if I'm not winding this up correctly and expressing our views. I think our view is we're extremely concerned that this solution does not solve the problem. We would therefore ask Cabinet to look at this again closely. We believe that we have reached a stage when it may be that we have to take drastic action of even selling some non-performing assets to raise our share of the capital to build that new building, because we do not believe that it is a viable alternative, what is being suggested, and puts us at risk of incurring ever greater costs going forwards, particularly if we lose our accreditation. And it's that aspect that worries me. I've never really sort of got my head round about, if we lose the accreditation, what does that cost us? We could actually end up spending 5 or 6 million dressed on hiring specialist storage elsewhere, which we're never going to get back. So is that a fair reflection on our view? I mean, clearly it's up to Cabinet to make the decision on where they go with this, but do we actually believe there is any other alternative, Bill?
I've got a bit of a different view to that, Chair. I think Fran said that they're only liable for revenue contributions towards the museum, not capital. So the capital bit is out of the question. They won't give money towards capital for a new building. They'll only pay the revenue for it. Is that right?
Now, our conversations with partners have been that if we were to build a new archive, we would expect that they would make a contribution based on that same formula split. The actual cost of the archive itself is not the 30 million. The actual cost of the archive is probably 20 million of the 30 million, or thereabouts. There's an archive not very far from here that was approved in the last few months, and it was around about the same figure. So yes, it would be a contribution against the 20 million. The other 10 million of it is the museum store that we would have to meet ourselves in total. So yeah.
So, Barry?
Yeah, I've got to agree with you, Chair. I mean, as I say, this has gone round and round. I don't think there's any of us in this room that wouldn't actually like to see the full-blown solution. I do think it's a sticking plaster. I'm very concerned about losing the accreditation, and we don't even have anything. And this is why I'm saying with this report, to me, it just doesn't give me enough information. I'd like to know what's it going to cost us if we lose the accreditation. Until we've got all those figures in front of us, no one can really make a proper decision. If it comes through and it's going to cost us 6 million just to do that, then you're immediately going to start looking. It's almost as if what's happening is you've got the pushback. We can't afford to do this. Come up with some other solutions to look after the stuff. And this is the bare bones of what you can do to try and keep things ticking over, but keeping things ticking over is not the solution. Someone's got to bite the bullet at some stage and move this forward.
Perhaps there is a way forward here. I think it's clear that the committee believe that the solution isn't adequate and doesn't actually meet the needs. And I have no doubt at all that Cabinet probably take the same view we do. And, it's at a time when money is tight, it's very difficult. I do wonder, particularly in the comment that Barry's just made, is this one of those times where perhaps we should look at, sitting down and having a look at all of the information, but perhaps doing it not as a committee, but as a working group, where we can actually sit down and work with you as our officers who understand this inside out and backwards to see if we can add some thoughts to might come up with. We'd certainly welcome, I'm sure, the portfolio holder and her assistant being involved if members will do that. Do we think that might be a way forward of we then get all of the information in one place? We understand everything about the agreements, we understand the costs, we understand what the cost of losing accreditation is. Might that be a way forward to try and provide some input to Cabinet on which they can make the best judged decision? I don't know. What do members think of that? Bill?
I think that's a good idea if it was if we're looking for a solution. I think we are looking for a solution. So I would second that little working group. I don't think we're in a position to make a decision on whether to demand, and I can understand the reasons behind it. I'm not belittling that at all, without knowing ourselves what the setup is at this moment in time. And I think exploring that would be quite good.
Thanks, Joe. I think we're a small enough committee that we could all form part of the working group and everybody could be invited. Would that be possible, John? Does that fit in with you, Christine, and what you think would assist Cabinet moving forward? Because, I mean, we're happy to put our combined intellect to this, limited like it might be, to see if we can provide the most help at all in making the decision which suits everybody.
Yes, Chairman, I'm very happy with that because I have raised my concerns quite often at the lead members meeting and at Cabinet that if we don't do something, it's going to cost us more in the long run. And I was concerned that we might lose the accreditation, and talking to Fran that they, you know, if they come in and tell us that we've got to do this, that and the other, it might cost us 5 or 6 million. That's just a thing I have to take out my head to put it somewhere else. So I think we've, I've quite a few years I've said we shouldn't be putting this on the back burner, and I've really got nowhere. And now it's coming that it's going to cost us twice as much than if we'd have done it 6 or 7 years ago when it was there to be looked at. So yes, I'm quite happy for a working group to go ahead.
Nick first, then back to you, Ted.
Thanks, Chair. I think one thing with the figures, I think they can be rough figures. We don't need them down to pounds and pence at this point. Just thinking of saving of officers' time and stuff. To the nearest, I think 10,000 on figures is near we need to be. I don't want the rest of the committee. We don't need to do more action than that, do we, at this stage? Just to save your times.
Ted?
When you think about the scrutiny structure, though, and Cabinet, any detailed working group that will produce quite a comprehensive report with a whole suite of figures is certainly going to have more sway with Cabinet and the senior management team than merely passing comments from scrutiny papers. So I'm fully in favour of that. It's worth pointing out, of course, that some of the off-site storage that would not be, the public wouldn't have access to, is not in Leicestershire. So it's something that we really, I'm very grateful for your concern, and so is Christy.
Thanks for that, Ted. And I think it's genuinely our desire is to try and come up with some thoughts that might lead Cabinet in a direction. This is not to say Cabinet are wrong or right. What we're trying to do is, as a scrutiny committee, is to look at what evidence we have available, come up with the best recommendations we might be able to make based on those evidence with facts and figures, to see if it may be that we are in a situation where, making no decision is not an option, putting a sticking plaster on is not an option. We've got to be bold and find a way of doing it. So if we could set that up, I mean, ideally we'd like to sort of, kick off within the next 3 or 4 weeks at that. But I mean, obviously, clearly you would need to sit down, Fran, with John to work out, how quickly you can get the information to get the, so, I mean, we'll be guided by you when we could start that working group. But I do think we need to fit in. I don't know what timescale Cabinet have got for making the decision, for instance, and therefore what our window of opportunity is.
In terms of this year's MTFS, it's probably gone. In terms of getting anything in the capital programme for next year, but obviously, we are and will be working towards next year's MTFS from now, really. So there's always the opportunity to be able to influence the conversations that take place over the summer which would lead up to the autumn MTFS for 25-26. I think in terms of timescale, probably depends on we'll work obviously with College and Democratic Services, but it probably depends on members' availability as much as anything else. Most of the information we would already have. I mean, obviously it's difficult to provide all the detailed information in a committee, but in a working group we could go through some of the level of detail that we can't go through in committee.
Thanks, John. That's exactly my point. I think a working group fits better in this scenario than a committee structure, and also it means we don't have the issue of minuting. You know, we're not trying to exclude the public. We just need to sit down and actually roll our sleeves up and do some work for what will be a report that will come back again once all that's done. So we're not excluding the public or anyone. So if we can sort of sort out some dates, I can liaise with Angie and we can sort out an appropriate date. That'd be great. So thank you for that. Everybody happy? Right, so if I'm not mistaken, that was the last report. So I says the recommendation on that report is that we are setting up a working group effectively, which I think has been welcomed, and we thank the portfolio holder for welcoming that as well. The date of the next meeting is on the 3rd of June 2024. That's of the committee. There will be a working group meeting between now and then. There were no urgent items, so I'm happy to declare the meeting closed and thank everybody for their questions and their input. So thank you all.
I take it was no for that time. We've gone down